Hello, hello, hello. Okay, hey, can everybody hear me okay in the back? The back there, can you hear me okay? That's great. That door is open. I lost a couple minutes because the group went long, so I'm just going to jump in and get started. My name is Phil Dillard, and I'm up here to talk to you about veterans veterans and inclusion today. How many people in the room are veterans here? Anyone? 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Hoorah, good to see you. How many people have no veterans or have veterans in their families? Okay, great. That's a good smattering. So some people are going to have an idea about what we're talking about today, or the importance of the topic today. But some people, this is going to be really new. What I want to get into is talking about why is it important, why, and to explain to you, open up an opportunity to explain to you why veterans can be great additions to your company, why veterans can be and should be an essential part of every diversity and inclusion initiative you've got. I start with this slide a little bit about me. I'm originally from Philadelphia. I grew up in South Jersey. I did everything in high school. I went to the Naval Academy undergrad as a physics major, and I went into the fleet as a surface warfare officer, first as an engineer and then as an intel officer. I left the Navy and went to the University of Chicago for my MBA. I did stints in consulting. I ran a division of a manufacturing company. Came out here to work at Charles Schwab as managing director of corporate strategy. And while I was at Schwab, I led the Military Veterans Network, which is an employee resource group at Charles Schwab, which is over 1,000 people spread across the country, and we worked on issues that were internal and external to the company. I left there and I've started up my entrepreneurial career and starting up my own company, advising different companies, and I now have my own firm where I advise early stage and growth companies, primarily in tech and business tech and clean tech. I give you a little bit of that as a bit of a background because I want to start with saying every veteran has their own story. Every veteran has their own part of the background and what makes them unique. An interesting part of my story is that we're at least four generations of military service in my family, but we're not a military family. It's not one of those families where you grew up as a flag officer and it was the family business, but we did our part and we went to serve our country, which is what a lot of people are doing right now who are veterans who are serving, right? I'm going to talk to you today about answering 3 main questions. And the real focus is, as I said before, how do we make sure that you understand the opportunity for technology companies for veterans today? So let's start with who are the military veterans? What's a veteran? Everybody has different interpretations. They try to figure out, well, does it mean they were in war or in combat or this or that or the other? I go back to a personal experience, right? My grandfather's generation volunteered for World War II, but they were limited in how they could serve. My father's generation, my father and his brother were both drafted. My mother had 5 brothers. 4 of them were drafted and 1 of them volunteered. But everybody who's a Gen Xer or a millennial, we all volunteered to go into service when we knew we were going into a shooting war, right? From my perspective, that's a first clue about not only the type of people that you're getting into, the character of the person that you're getting into, but also that there are different types of veteran experiences, but they're all relevant and they're all germane. So companies should understand that these folks bring skills that you can use right away. And what I'm going to show you later is some very specific examples of day-to-day skills and experiences that can translate to work experience and help close what I call this access and awareness gap between employers and veterans. Because the problem, what worked for me was because I came through the pipeline of a top 5 MBA school. Actually, it was the #1 school in the country at the time. It still is, actually. But I came through a pipeline where they're used to bringing MBAs from top 5, top 10 schools into the corporation. But most veterans don't have that opportunity. Similarly, most of these companies out here, and particularly tech companies, aren't aware of the pipeline, aren't aware of the talent, and don't know how to connect those people. So I want to make sure that we talk about who the folks are, why you want to hire them, and how we close that gap. I'd like to thank our friends from Victory Media for this slide, and I would bring your focus really to 3, 4, and 5 on this why hire military list, right? Team players, educated and savvy, quick learners. This isn't the draftee, this isn't the person who is avoiding high school. These are people who are very sharp, who are very motivated, and they're in the most technically well-trained military we have on the planet. Right? If you think about the demographics of this group, they're very young. It's a very big number. Over 250,000 people a year coming out of the US military today. right? So let's layer this on top of another demographic piece. If you think about military veterans, lots of people think about who they see in movies, guys who are kicking in doors and dropping bombs, right? But for every person, as we like to say, who's on the pointy end of the spear, every person pulling a trigger, there are 9 people in support. And every day, all those people who are veterans are doing those support roles, right, or doing those combat roles, and every one of them has a very specific skill that they can bring to your company and add value today. We are skewed a little heavy as a percentage of the population in the African American, a little lighter in the Latino numbers, but that's just a data point. Here's another interesting data point. The people come from all over, right? They come from all over at a very young age, which means they have a bunch of different ideas and stigmas and stereotypes embedded in who they are and where they're from. But when they come into the cohesive unit and they come through the training, and you know that your life depends in many ways really on the person next to you in all walks of life in the military, you drop a lot of those things automatically, or they're beaten out of you, and you become a much more diverse team player. And I've seen the transformation myself. The next thing that's really important for a technology, for a growing company is they're willing to relocate. These people are used to moving 18 to 36 months all over the place, right? Changing jobs, changing descriptions, and sometimes into very difficult and unknown environments. Harsh environments, life-threatening environments for a number of different reasons. Why does this matter to technology companies or growing companies? Well, it's easy to attract people to San Francisco, but it's a little more difficult when you want to go across the country and around the world and in places that make people being uncomfortable away from being with their family. But military families, this is part of our DNA, and we find our community, and we see these as opportunities for growth of our career and giving value to the company that we're talking about. So let's move on to the next point. When I talk about some of these people, I think about some of these words that come to mind, and I'm going to focus on the bottom part of the words about values-based, mission-oriented, technically trained, and free thinking. These people aren't automatons who are taking orders. There is a delegation of authority and a top-down command, but when you're the person in charge, it's your call. The captain of the ship at sea is God, right? Commander of a Marine unit in the field is in charge, especially if he's cut off. He's got to make all those sorts of decisions. And those guys go from being kicking in doors to being the guys who are the ambassadors of goodwill and handing out food and humanitarian aid, and in places like Afghanistan and Iraq, setting up the infrastructure that allows the country, or at least gives them the opportunity to move forward from where they were. In this next section, I'm going to go through some visuals, and I stick to the Navy and Marine Corps because it's what I know the most, but you could do the same thing for the Air Force and the Coast Guard, I guess, and the Army. It's a little sibling rivalry we got going on, but you know, we do this. When you leave the coast, when you leave port in the Navy or Marine Corps, you're effectively in a wartime posture every day, and you're under risk. So I'm going to talk about a couple different things that we do all the time that give skills. This one I talk about is about logistics. So this is what you call underway replenishment. Ships are moving along 15, 20 knots side by side. They don't stop for security reasons, and they shoot over this line, this refueling probe. The guy who's in charge of this operation of several thousand people and all these ships that are operating within a few, whoops, I hit the wrong button, within a few, about 110 feet of each other is 25 years old. I did this driving the ship in the middle, like on this picture, at 25. And this is 6,000 people's lives at risk, 10 helicopters flying back and forth, 3 lines of fuel and equipment. And you do this every day, right? So then there's something like this. This is a picture of an amphibious ready group. It's different than the carrier you saw in the previous picture because these are folks who go when there's unrest in a country, when a volcano erupts, when a tsunami hits, or when you need to take over a small country. These are the folks who go and they do the tactical war planning. They figure out where everyone needs to go and where everyone needs to be so that the planes don't run out of fuel, so that you're picking up the people at the right place, so no one gets stranded, right? This is really planning emergency relief. This is where I learned tactical planning. When I walked into the civilian world, people talking about planning, and I saw their plans, and I was like, that's light. If I was planning an invasion, or if I was planning an amphibious assault, I would spend 2 weeks out, and I would do first it would be hours, and then it would be by minute. We would do rates of how ships and equipment moved and what our options were, so we had all the options to get people in and out safely. People learn this stuff. If you think about this is the inside of one of those carriers you're talking about. There's a hovercraft in here with a bunch of vehicles on it. This is all about logistics and complex problem solving. What people do in this is, if you're a Marine, you have a bunch of artillery pieces and tanks and trucks and all this stuff to move. Well, you got to get them on the beach, and you got to get them in the right order so nobody gets stranded. But you got to figure that out. You got to move them out in a very effective way to meet my schedule. And all the people who do this, who led these sort of things, were under 25 years old. This next one I'm going to show you is a Seawolf attack submarine. Now, if you're in a submarine, if you're in a big metal tube, hundreds of feet underwater, next to a nuclear reactor, you have nobody to call for help when you have a fire, when you have a problem, if you have to scram the reactor, and all these different things. People like this have an incredible aptitude for difficult environments, right? Challenging environments, and the technical skill to manage them. They also, there are also people who do the same sort of thing on the flip side. I referred to these Marine officers before, the guys who are walking the streets, who are talking with the Pashtun leaders in Afghanistan. These folks are dealing with physically challenging environments. I challenge you to find a Marine Corps officer who's not a great political scientist and who's not aware of the detailed nuances of the local challenges of the places where they served. These sort of things translate extremely well into sensitive environments around the world. So I bring it back to close with this slide to say, well, people say, well, that's great. What have they done afterwards? The common thread on all the logos on this slide is that all of these CEOs are military veterans. Some are older generations, some are newer generations, but the path to success that some of these folks have taken is clear. It's lumpy, it's challenging. We believe that and the numbers dictate, that it's not strong enough, that companies that think that they have a talent gap and haven't looked at this resource as an opportunity for themselves are missing out on a unique opportunity. So, what's the employment problem? I distill it down to these 5 basic points that you see on the screen, but when I really simplify it, it's this gap that I talk about between awareness and access. The veteran, because of the community, because of where they're from, because they speak a different language, because they spent all this time training in a unique and insular environment, they don't know how to speak the civilian language. They don't necessarily know how to transition to that role. Similarly, the company doesn't know where to look for these people. They don't understand what they're talking about, and it seems kind of hard. They don't know how the technology skills translate. But the people are working electronics that are as complex or more complex than what you see. They're running IT networks. I have my uncle and a guy I met recently while preparing for this talk worked on the same project in Afghanistan to build IT infrastructure that is state-of-the-art internet architecture. When my uncle went back, he's been in the Army for over 20 years, he had the ability to talk about his value and secure himself a very high-paying position. The other guy didn't have that and couldn't get a job. And it's a travesty because he would be a great employee if the employer knew how to interview him and he knew how to sell himself better. So, what do we do to address it? I love this quote. I want to start with it from John F. Kennedy. A lot of time people say to me, thank you so much for your service. And I want to say to them, I want to give them something to make it easy for them to do more than thank me, but to do something that's going to help solve what I see as a somewhat systematic problem that's easy to solve. So, there's a range of options of what we can do, from starting about becoming aware of the situation, becoming aware of the opportunities, and understanding that this is a challenge for the military veteran who's the person who went out and intentionally put themselves in harm's way to defend their country and to defend their family. So how do we tackle some of the low-hanging fruit? Well, there are 7 steps here, 7 recommended steps. And these are similar to some of the things that I've heard about setting up an employee resource group and others, right? Find your sponsor, put some person in charge, get a budget. These are all the things that I saw that Charles Schwab did really well in setting up the employee resource group that I led when I was there. So something to think about in terms of what we can do to address it. From my perspective, I also want to give you a call to action. Today, yes, you can dig deeper. Yes, you should meet some people. Outside, there's a table in the back. I got the folks here from the Marines Memorial Club and from the Fleet Week Committee to sit and listen, to sit there and be able to share with you opportunities to engage. I would encourage anyone who has the least bit of interest to think about going to the humanitarian village to see what the Marines and the Navy do when when a natural disaster occurs. Go to the Veterans Conference. It's a full-day inclusion conference about veterans issues for people who are looking to figure out how to hire veterans, how to close that gap. It's here, it's in San Francisco, it's during Fleet Week on Columbus Day weekend. It's not only about the beautiful air show, it's about the Navy and the Marine Corps meeting with local responders and preparing for disaster preparedness, major catastrophe events, because that's what we'll do if those sort of things happen here. And think about how you might want to invest in the community or making changes in the company. And once again, I hit the wrong button. But I want to thank the folks from the Tech Inclusion Conference, Marine Memorial, Victory Media, and others. We're here to talk a little bit. I'm going to stand over at the table with them. This is not part of my business. I don't do anything around diversity inclusion. I'm not a diversity inclusion expert, but I advocate my time for companies. Sorry, advocate my time to help companies and individuals to bridge this gap, because that's what you do for your family, and these are my brothers and sisters in arms. I'd like to thank you very much for your time and attention, and talk to you soon.